Good afternoon. This is Critical Talk with Professor Abdul, and I have the honor of interrogating, learning from, questioning, sharing with Dr. Suad Abdul Khabeer. And because the thing that she, in addition to her writings and her talks, is most known for is Apollo Square, the last part of her name is not there, but you can certainly find it on the website. And let me tell you a little bit about her. I am so proud of her. I can't stand myself. So just bear with me while I inform the rest of you. She's a scholar, artist, activist who uses anthropology and performance to explore the intersections of race and popular culture. And believe it or not, this is something many in the audience don't know anything about. So we'll get into an explanation of that. She is currently an associate professor of American culture and Arab and Muslim American studies at the University of Michigan. She received her PhD in cultural anthropology from Princeton University and is a graduate from the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. And she completed the Islamic Studies diploma program of the Institute at Abu Noor University in Damascus. Her book, which we will definitely talk about, called Muslim Cool: Race, Religion, and Hip Hop in the United States, has been an award winning text. I've used it, everybody I know has used it, everybody I could get to use it has used it, and it's delicious. It's an ethnography on Islam and hip hop that examines how interesting ideas of Muslimness and Blackness challenge and reproduce the meanings of race in the US. This woman has done a lot in her short academic career, and which just gives us a little bit of a presage as to what is to come. She leads Sapelo Square, the first website dedicated to the comprehensive documentation and analysis of the Black U.S. American Muslim experience. She has written for The Root, The Washington Post, The Atlantic, Ebony Magazine. You know, the list is too long. And also for Al Jazeera English. I'm not going to have any time to get to what I want to say if I read your darn bio here. She, and I'll end with the fact that she was profiled by CNN as one of the 25 influential American Muslims. With that, and let me say that there's much more. Let us welcome you. Salam alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure, my honor. What I want to do first, and I want to ask some questions before I go into the book and Suppose Square,
hmm
is how is it going at University of Michigan?
Yeah, so I'm currently, like you said, an associate professor at the University of Michigan. I started my sort of tenure track professor career at Purdue University in Indiana. And then I left Purdue when I was getting tenure. I got tenure and I moved to the University of Michigan, where I joined the American Culture Department and after I became a director of this program, Arab and Muslim American Studies, which is like one of three in the world that does that. It's an ethnic studies program, which means it's not like a Near Eastern studies or Middle Eastern studies program, but it really focuses on sort of Arab Americans and US American Muslims and their relationship to questions of race, religion, gender, sexuality, transnationalism. And I'm actually outgoing director because I'm going on leave to pursue my own research this summer. And so, yeah, it's been a good transition, I think, from I'm still in the Midwest and I'm from Brooklyn, so that's always
Always,
right. But I think it's been nice to see how different universities work. This is also a big school, a Big Ten school. But also here, which is different than Purdue, and even where I studied undergrad and grad school, there's a huge Muslim population. So there are a lot of actually, like, I've had classes with like mostly Muslim students in it, which is that's a first in, in the academy.
Yeah.
And so that's also been an interesting experience and a different way teaching the same material, but having different populations, right, who are engaging it with the different ways. So, it's been all
How do
right.
students respond to the fact that you're obviously black and female?
So it's interesting. I think so. The Muslim students, I'll start with them. I had this experience. The first class I taught, and there were these maybe 3 or 4 Arab American Muslim young women students, and I was and they were looking at me kind of giddy, and and I was,
Albino.
and at first I was kind of confused. So I was like, what are they doing? Particularly because I'm not an Arab American woman, right? So, I mean, I can imagine since of the affinity, but one of my friends said was like, well, when did you have a Muslim professor, in college? It's like, oh yeah, right. So I think for some of them, there's been that, and I think people have been excited. I think other people, Muslim students, have not had the same reaction. I think in terms of just, the questions of gender and race and the ways which people might question you, which is also true in terms of the broader population, right? In particular, particularly in terms of white students, this idea that, being a Black woman, a Black Muslim woman, and folks, haven't been taught even subconsciously, right, that you're not an authority figure. And so that being a place and when people want to challenge you, I had this one experience where I teach hip hop as well. And I had a student in a hip hop class who really was sort of challenging me on, well, actually, what he would do all the time is ask me if I knew something, like, do you know about this? Do you know about that? And it's like, hip hop is expansive. And so sometimes I didn't know, and I don't have any shame in that. Like, it's okay. Like, I don't have to know everything, but I could tell sometimes, do you really know what you're talking about? So that's also been part of the experience.
It's interesting that you say that because recently, and I don't know I think it was one of the shows we did here, a white Muslim American challenged me about using the term black. Oh, I took this one course in African American studies, and you're all African American. I said, oh, name me, please, name me. I don't know who I am.
Right.
All these years, name me. But as an older academic, I wish you well.
Thank you.
More interesting.
Yeah,
I
thank
would
you.
like to ask my producer to pull up the face of the book because I read this. This book is so rich that we just got to talk about this book.
Yes, yeah.
Can you cue it up, please? Who's got a dog?
Oh, someone. I'm on a porch.
Okay.
You can hear that. I didn't because it's usually super quiet around here. So I was like, oh, this will be okay. Yeah. But I can start talking about the book if you want while we're waiting. Yeah. So so the book is called Muslim Cool: Race, Religion, and Hip Hop in the United States. It's based on research I did over 10 years of research that I did looking at how Muslims in the United States sort of engage hip hop music and culture. And it's something that I did or was interested in because I'm really interested in the ways in which ideas of Black identity and Muslim identity intersect in the United States and what that teaches us about how race works in the US and how race and Blackness work in the US. I'm an anthropologist. And so my main sort of method, right, of work is field work, ethnographic research, where you basically spend a lot of time with people to learn from them. I spent most of my time in Chicago, Illinois, but I also did some research in the Bay Area and California and also in the UK. I think one of the main things that the book argues is that, when young Muslims are engaging hip hop music, because hip hop music is in many ways a protest music. I mean, it's diverse and it has lots of different things that it does. But one of the things that's kind of fundamental to hip hop is a sort of resistance, right, to sort of dominant culture. And that's something that hip hop gets from Muslims, actually, right? One of the things I argue is that the fundamental contribution that Black Muslims gave hip hop is this concept of knowledge of self. So that's one of the things. And then the other thing is that, because hip hop is resistant, you find young Muslims, a variety of racial, ethnic backgrounds, also using hip hop, right, to resist, to challenge anti-Blackness as we see it in Muslim communities. But at the same time, because of the ways in which Blackness can be used to both challenge anti-Blackness and reproduce it, then that's also something that's happening when Muslims are using hip hop.
Okay. I think I want to go back
Mm-hmm.
to the term intersectionality, which is very much, even though it's lived every day, it's still very much an academic term.
Mm-hmm.
So unpack that for us.
Right.
So you defined it.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Well, I actually didn't. I didn't use the term intersectionality. So I use in
The
what I just
intersection of.
intersection exactly. So what I'm thinking about is how, for example, when a person is Black and Muslim, like that's one intersection, right? And what happens when a person is Black and Muslim? So, for example, because in U.S. society, right, there are these ideas of anti-Blackness in which being Black is seen as socially, like, downwardly mobile, right? Is seen as hypersexual, as seen as hyper violent, right? These are these ideas that exist whether you're Muslim or not. When you enter into Muslim communities, however, right, then how do these ideas take shape? So one of the things that I talk about in the book, for example, is I talk about the policing of Blackness through Black music. So I talk about how, for example, at a conference, I went to an ISNA conference when I was doing my research for Islamic Society of North America. And there was this crew of Muslims and non-Muslims who performed they signed up to perform. And it was a DJ, and it was some b-boys, some dancers, and an MC. The song was about God, right? The DJ was spinning and cutting songs about God in different languages, English, Qawwali, all types of stuff, right? So it was like what we would call a nasheed, right? This idea. But at the conference, the people who organized the event shut them down because they were like, "Oh, you can't scratch Allah's name like on a turntable," which, and in fact, the DJ actually did not do, right? That literally he did not do that. But there was this policing of it, right? There was this idea that, well, this is not what we're used to. This is something Black about this thing, right? And when I talked to the DJ about it, it was like I joked with him. It was haram upon haram upon haram, right? It was like
Oh, so now he was God, huh? Because only God makes it haram. But
right.
Oh, he was God. Okay.
Right. No, I would say we were joking in terms of how they responded, right? So this idea that on one hand, music, not all Muslims believe in music, right? Some Muslims believe, you can't listen to music. So there's some.
Right. How can there? I'm when you say a belief in something, that's one thing, but there's music all through Islam, from the Quranic recitation to other things. So how could one not? Are you saying that when it comes to music produced by Black folks, something is innately wrong with it?
So what I'm saying is that the music, right? So there are three levels to it. So one is just the general idea that some Muslims believe the only music that's appropriate might be Quranic recitation, might be a drum, right? Okay. Then there is the idea that people don't recognize that the voice is a technology, right? Like right? So therefore, so is a record, right? It's a technology. It operates in the same kind of way.
Right.
And so because people are not accustomed to sort of understanding that conceptually, they're like, they resist that. Then you add the other layer onto it that it's Black music. And again, because Black people are seen as hypersexual, as hyper-violent, as downwardly mobile, then that's why we joked it was like haram upon haram upon haram, right? Because in all these ways, the ways in which some Muslims, how they're looking at it and they're listening to it and they're like, this is not right. This is not halal. This is wrong, right? And so that's one example of that intersection, right? Because it's not that there is actually nothing. How should I say? It isn't actually haram. Like that's not the claim, but it's the perception.
The Quran names what is haram.
Right.
Why is that discussion extend to music?
That's a good question. And I think that for me, the way that I understand it in terms of my work and my research, it extends to music in so much as that um, for Muslims in this country, for many Muslims in this country, people are trying to assert themselves, trying to assert a Muslim identity, and trying to own it, right? And trying to own it in ways that they're comfortable with. And I think that, and I'm speaking specifically, well, actually, it's not only just South Asian and Middle Eastern Muslims, because one of the things I also talk about in the book is the kind of self-policing that Black Muslims will do themselves.
Yep.
So, this same kind of ideology that kind of makes Blackness sort of already and always un-Islamic um, is.
But where do you think that comes from? It's not organically in Black America. So what is influencing now is this a clash of if I'm in this faith community,
Mm-hmm,
there's all of these no-nos now.
mm-hmm. I think it comes from a couple things. I think it comes from ideas of anti-Blackness that are outside of the US, right? So the ways in which, for example, sort of Blackness and be in servitude or sutured together, right? And like sort of like, sort of like in the Middle East. So the idea that people call Black people abid, which means slave, right? So these ideas that there's something, these negative associations with Blackness that are not even US based, but they exist right outside the United States, part of sort of global white supremacy. Then, of course, the ideas of anti-Blackness that emerge here. So these things kind of converge in a way, and the aspirations toward whiteness as well, right? And so this idea of, being in this country and wanting to be successful, wanting to have the American dream, wanting to be seen in a certain way.
Music,
Huh?
they appropriate the hell out of Black music.
Right. But
what are we saying here?
right. But I think you're right that white folks do appropriate Black music. But I think that it's one thing when white people appropriate Black music, it's appropriation in the sense that they can change the meaning and what it means, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think for the Arab and the South Asian and for some Black folks, there's they don't they're and I think quite rightly that they can't change the meaning, right? So they're concerned about the association. So white folks do it's okay because they're white, right? And they can do a lot of stuff. But if I do it, will I be associated with that?
In the book where you talk about young immigrant Muslims trying to appropriate and dress in. There's something else in language. I don't know enough about anthropology to talk about dialects and all this other stuff. But I hear the voices change. I hear the gestures try to change. You know that they're not natural when you're looking at them. But there is another kind of appropriation that goes on that is scaring the hell out of their parents.
So I think there are two ideas that I use in the book. I want to say three things. So one is that there are these two ideas that I talk about in the book in terms of how Muslim communities, particularly Middle Eastern and South Asian, engage with Black culture. So one is disavowal. So like what happened at that ISNA event, they don't want no parts of it. They're like, this is wrong, this is un-Islamic, that kind of thing. Then there is what I call instrumentalization. This idea that, well, let's use this culture, right, as a way to do something. So I actually think instrumentalization is what had them allow them to do the performance in the first place. So the idea that Black stuff is cool, we want to, we want our youth to show up. Let's do this kind of thing, right? But when people show up, we're going to police them and make sure they do it in a certain way. But then there's a third thing that happens, and this is with the non-Black Muslim youth that I work with most closely. I think for them, sort of hip hop culture and in the forms of Blackness that go along with hip hop were a conduit or a way in which they were trying to understand who they were in the United States as non-Black people, as South Asian background people, as Middle Eastern people. That doesn't mean, and it never meant, that they completely escape the question of appropriation. But one of the things that they struggled with was to have actual relationships with Black people. So for example, they would be volunteers at the Inner City Muslim Action Network in Chicago that works in the Southwest side of Chicago, works in Black communities, works around issues concerning Black people. So they're engaging this and they're engaging Blackness, but trying to do so in a way that is reflective, is respectful. Like one young woman talked about wanting to wear her scarf in a bun, and she discovered that style. She was a South Asian background. She discovered that style, Addie Man, and she wanted to do it because she thought it was cool, but she knew that it had a cultural meaning to Black women, and so she sort of was like, she waited until she felt like she had permission to do it. And so that's a different kind of engagement than both either just saying rejecting it outright or just trying to use it for your own purposes. And that's not perfect, but I don't think, because of our history in this country and because of the long, long history of the theft of Black culture, I don't think we ever get out of that. I think we just try to do better at engaging with each other's cultures.
So tell me before I move along, because Sapello is so rich too. Tell me, is there anything else you think we must know about this book? And for those listening and viewing who haven't read it, as I said at the opening, it is very rich. Um,
I think,
Different sections do different things. Anthropology, I think the one thing you didn't talk about
mhm.
was how you have brought anthropology, along with some others, but they're very few, to America. Anthropologists always work messing around in somebody else's backyard.
Yes.
So, bringing it here to issue what we have here is awesome.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's true. I was actually just having a conversation last night with another Black Muslim woman, PhD anthropologist, Donna Austin, and we were talking about that. And she also does work in the US and the ways in which anthropology as a discipline is sort of known for like studying the quote unquote other,
Yeah.
and what it means to choose to sort of bring ethnographic methods to a local, to your own, and in a way it's your own and not, because I'm from Brooklyn, I'm not from Chicago, so there are all these ways in which you're both apart but also separate, right?
Right, right.
I think the only other thing I would say that I want to talk about in terms of the book is probably the last chapter, that's called The Limits of Muslim Cool. And so throughout most of the book, I'm talking about sort of that last thing I just mentioned, the ways in which Muslims are struggling with identity, not struggling with identity, but sort of shaping their own senses of identity through hip hop, through engagements with hip hop, through Blackness, both Black Muslims and non Black young Muslims. But again, I think there's a way in which hip hop itself, which initially, again, like I said, started as this kind of resistance to the status quo music, has also become, in many ways, the face of empire, right?
Mhm.
So it's the ways in which sort of, you'll have, whether it's both corporate empire, so you'll have, like sort of corporations using hip hop to sort of like spread, to make money, right? And make money off of people and impoverish people, and the same way the US government does that. And so I think that creates a particular kind of um, just a particular kind of challenge for Muslims in this country, right?
Mhm.
In terms of how to, like, there's a, let me backtrack. One of the things that I argue in the book is that since the civil rights era, pre-civil rights era, the idea of America as a white country was sort of like the party line. Post the civil rights era, America is supposed to be a multicultural country. Like, that's the party line, right? And so all the ways in which people resist racism and inequality, you resist it, but the state kind of says, okay, well, we'll give you like a little, here's your corner to resist, right? So you get your corner to
Oh,
resist.
yeah.
Right, exactly. Here's your corner. You can resist in this corner till the cows come home, but nothing is really going to change. So I think and I think we see that now what's happening, right? The uprisings, people are like, we don't want to be in this corner. Like, we need fundamental change.
Yeah.
Right?
And
Yeah,
we also don't want to repeat what you've done to us and let it slide.
exactly. Right.
I want to go to Sapello.
Hmm.
Can you cue that up for me, please? I hate that background. Make the picture bigger.
Muslims teach us how to live and lead with dignity and grace and joy and style in the face of all kinds of oppression. Black Muslims embody intersections, which teach us that the more we intersect, the better we see and the more we can do to change the world.
Okay, I'm going to apologize. We don't seem to queue up anything without that horrible background there.
It brings some levity. It's cool.
Oh my God, it's disconcerting for me. But talk to us about Sapelo.
Yeah, so Sapelo Square
I'm
is
sorry, Sapelo.
yeah,
And
it's
I know Sapelo Island, so
right,
sorry.
right.
Um,
It's like I said, it's a kind of an online platform. You know, we started in May 19th of 2015, was when we launched. It was an idea that actually kind of came to me probably like 4 years earlier. I just was actually starting to teach at in Indiana. And I'm a Black Muslim woman from Brooklyn in Indiana, and I'm just looking around and I'm like,
cornfield, windmill.
right.
I
And
remember talking to you during those
right.
days. And you
And
were
so,
amazing.
and I thought to myself, if I could just see people, even online, that looked like me, it would just be so much, it would just make this easier. And that kind of was the kind of first kernel of Sapelo.
It's not 2019. When was it launched?
2015.
Okay.
2015, May 19,
To
2015.
make a correction there. Okay.
And so then I just reached out to a bunch of smart Black Muslim people I knew, and I was like, hey, let's try to put this together. And so we did. And one of the things that we try to do with Sapelo is, I think I like to say, one of the, I like to say Black Muslims are like Black Muslims in the US are a small but powerful community, right? We gave the world Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X, And so I think that there's something important, right, about this community and what they have to say. And I think the reality is, unfortunately, particularly since 9/11, when people talk about Muslims, they don't talk about Black Muslims, right? And they don't talk about their impact. They don't pay attention to sort of what you learn from people who live at that intersection, right? And so one of the things that we decided to do was, because there's different ways you can handle that, right? One way you can handle that is, what people should do. You should sort of, petition the like major papers and the major media, to be more representative. You should do that. But I think Black Muslims have a kind of ethos of a do for self, right? And so for me, it's like, let's just do it ourselves. Like, we don't need anybody to sort of tell our stories. We can tell it for ourselves. And so Sapelo, that's what we try to do. The name, as you mentioned, we took the name, the Sapelo part comes from the Sapelo Island, where Bilali Muhammad, who was an enslaved African Muslim, lived with his family. And there are all these records of the ways in which they...
Where is it? Say where it is.
Off the coast of Georgia. And there are records of how they tried to maintain, right, their religious practice. So we're inspired by that history. And then Square, we took from sort of Congo Square, the idea of a town square. And we want to be a place where people can come and meet and discuss and analyze and celebrate. And so we have sections. So we have arts and culture, we have religion, politics, history, and then we do these kind of special features. So one of them just passed was Ramadan. And so this is our fourth time doing it. We sort of solicit reflections. And so for people who don't know, in the month of Ramadan, Muslims typically read, the Quran has 30 parts. You read a part a day for the month. So what we do in Ramadan is we solicit reflections from Black Muslim creatives, authors, scholars, to sort of do a reflection. This year, we had some really great reflections too.
Yes.
Professor Aldine gave us a reflection.
Well, but I heard some smokers.
Yeah, we had this one, and we're trying to be more diverse with the medium. So we had a sister Malika Ayubi had a painting. There's a beautiful painting that was a reflection on the verse in the Quran. This other sister, Khabeer, did a short story. It was really, I think, fantastic. And it's one of the things that folks really enjoy that we do. Like, it's one of the things that people enjoy the most that we do.
But you did that wonderful something on Malcolm X's birthday.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so this year was our 5th year anniversary, and so we chose to launch Sapelo on Malcolm's birthday because of what he represents. And so for us, he represents sort of the what it like sort of this the high the for us he represents, being Black and Muslim, and what that means in terms of this unwavering commitment to Black liberation, this unwavering commitment to truth and to justice, and to advancement. And so we launched on his birthday on purpose in 2015, and then when we turned 5, we said we have to do something to commemorate. So we had this program, and we had performances by Maimouna Youssef, Tammy McCann and Tariq Touré. And then we also had 3 short discussions. So we had a discussion on Malcolm as a Muslim with Zahir Ali. We had a discussion on Malcolm in the prison industrial complex with Jihad Abdul Mamit from the Jericho movement. And then we had a discussion on Malcolm X and the COVID-19 crisis, like his legacy, with Marguerite Hill from the Black Muslim COVID Coalition. And, it really was just like a time to commemorate, to celebrate. And it really, I have to say, like, you never know how these things are going to turn out. But I think, there were some real powerful sort of conversations, gems, performances that came out of that, that I think really, like, for example, Maimouna Youssef did her own rendition of Tala al Badru Alaina, like this sort of historic song from Muslim tradition. And she also did this hymn because she is Afro-Native, like Afro-Indigenous. So she also did this indigenous hymn, right? A battle hymn, So, I mean, there were all these really, and I think that for me was great because I think when people think about Black folks, there's a way that people imagine us as really small and really right, homogenous and small and parochial, right? And like, and I think one of the things that we try to demonstrate with everything we do with Sapelo and also on that May 19th is just how vast, how expansive, Black folks are, their experiences and what they offer. So yeah, so we are, we've been doing that, and we're all volunteer team, so that's been a struggle. And so
it always is, but it's successful.
Right. And so we continue to try to grow sort of support for the work that we're doing. We invite folks to write. We invite folks to sort of join the squad if they're interested in being a part of this. We're in 5 years. We're in 5 years, and we're looking to sustain for many more.
Tell us how our audience can donate, how they can become a part of the square, how they can keep it going.
Yeah. So in terms of donations, you can go to our website, sapelosquare.com/donate. And there's a way to become both a one-time donation, or, which is even better, if to become a monthly donor, right? So that you can sort of continuously support the work. We also have on their way a join the squad as an option. And so, for example, some of the things that we're looking for is folks who might be interested in being editors for us. So when we get submissions, you help us sort of review the submissions, prepare the submissions. We're looking for folks who might want to help us with photography, and like kind of the media part of it, social media. So there's lots of different, on the website, it has a sort of the list of the different roles that are there. We have people who we even have an admin coordinator who's great. And it's just like, because even like, so there's the front face of Sapelo, right? And then there's all the stuff that goes into like
behind.
Right. And so, I think, helping us doing that. And one of the things that I'm actually excited, and I'll share this here, is that we've had people say to us that they would like to translate some of our work into Arabic, into French, into Spanish. So I'm looking forward to that, which will, because we already have an international audience, but one of the, of course, the downsides is that it's English only. And so, but I think the ideas that we have and the things that are there, definitely should be to broader audiences.
Yeah.
And so we've just gotten some people say, hey, if you want, I can translate something. So I'm looking forward to getting,
Well, some of them are listening because we're streaming, and some of the stream is being picked up by ex-students of mine and others in Turkey who are living in the UK. And so that's one of the advantages to letting them know you may not be black, but here's something you can support because you understand its rationale. I would encourage those viewing and listening, please go to the website. It is so full of stuff. I mean, you can spend a good, if you really, really look, a couple hours, because there's stuff to listen to, there's stuff to watch.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, we
there,
just
well,
I was say some of the recent things we published. We just want to publish. We actually just published a piece that I wrote, called "Prayers of the Oppressed," and it's about.
mhm.
I wrote a du'a for our enslaved ancestors, and I talked about sort of that process, but also the importance of us writing our own prayers, right, and the languages of our needs, and remembering our ancestors. We also had a poem. A brother wrote a poem in a West African classical qasida style for George Floyd.
Oh, love.
And there's both the
I saw
audio.
that. I saw that. I didn't get a chance to listen or read, but
Yeah,
I
yeah,
saw that and I said,
yeah,
wow.
yeah. So we've had, so we're really trying to, I think one of the things that we try to do with our content too is to sort of maybe like elevate the conversation, so there are lots of things to talk about, but we want people to sort of be provoked, like when they read something or they watch something, and provoked to think, and then provoked to act, right? So how, after you got this new information, can you do something new and different in the world? And so that's what we're hoping happens.
Well, I hope it happens too. And in my musings, I looked up on this program, we had Marguerite, now we have you. When I tracked down the woman from Black Lives Matter, we'll have that. And I said, oh my goodness, maybe this is what's causing the resistance, the hesitation. All of these major spaces are being occupied by women of color.
Mm.
Because I've heard some very interesting things. Well, I don't know what they're doing. I don't know. One woman wrote on one program I did,
Hmm.
oh, Muslims don't demonstrate in the streets. And I don't know what bubble she lives in or what
Right.
planet.
Right.
And I hope she's listening tonight and heard me say that. Um, then last week there was uh, a webinar
Mm.
where South Asian Muslim woman gets a bunch of people, Keith Ellison and some other leaders in the community, and says, "Okay, tell me about your first experience being called the N word." And said she didn't say N word; she actually said the word.
Oh, wow.
They should have done was left. And I said, it's good you had the right people because if you had some black women, you probably would never have another webinar as long as you live. But I kept my commitment. He said, every program I do this week, I'm going to bring it up. Um, I think that the cultural disconnects, but also the lack of cultural competence
Mm.
is amazing.
Mm.
You use black people to Muslims to demonstrate, you're on your phone, demonstrate when it's for Palestine, when it's for Syria, when it's for Libya, when it's none of those large overseas campaigns have been about Senegal, Mali, Ghana.
Mm.
So even the Muslims in South Africa had to get these South Asians there off their backs and form a new organization.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
saying, what is going on here? And then somebody had the audacity to talk to me today about Nkrumah, and I didn't want to hang up on him because I like him. But I'm saying, really, um, why is it everybody? Africa, that continent is kind of large, got a lot of Muslims, and
Mm.
the only ones you can touch are the ones up north. You can't touch all the west.
Right. 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 Right.
Real special. But leave my angst, and I want to talk about your upcoming research agenda.
Yeah. So like I said, I'm very excited. I'll be on leave from
And you're
teaching.
coming to visit me.
Yes. Well, once we can travel, right?
Oh, I hate you.
So I haven't. My new project is called Umi's Archive. It's a multimedia project.
Only Like
Umi, like mother, UMI. Yes.
mother.
Umi.
Okay.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Okay.
So, because Umi is what I call, Umi is how I refer to my mother.
Yeah.
And so the archive, so Umi's archive is a multimedia project that is built around my mother's life. So my mother was born Audrey Weeks in 1950, and she passed away as Amina Amatul Haq in 2017. And she lived a remarkable life, but it wasn't a singular one. And so what I'm really interested in is sort of understanding better her life and the networks that she was a part of to better understand the Black experience. There are all these themes that kind of come out of her life. So there's the question of obviously religion and spirituality, because she became a Muslim and she wasn't born a Muslim. She was born into a Christian family. But there's also the theme of the Black middle class, because she grew up in 1950s, 1960s New York, and she grew up as kind of in a working class, like a middle class, I would say lower middle class family. And there's a lot of I'm interested in that, because what Queens was, she grew up in Queens, New York. So what Queens was then versus what Queens is now, and who the Black middle class is. There's questions of diaspora and migration, because her grandparents immigrated to the United States from the Caribbean. And there's also these questions of internationalism in activism, in terms of her work. She was a student activist when she was in college at Ohio State. She joined the Black Panther Party when she was there. Then she became Muslim and was an activist in New York. And she helped a lot. Her and a group of sisters in New York City were really involved with a lot of like building of institutions, right, in the Black community, in the Muslim community. And so I'm just really, I think her generation, I think sometimes it feels like we know a lot, but often I actually feel like we don't know a lot about sort of that generation and what they offered. And I'm particularly interested in learning about it, because I think that there's stuff that we need from that we can apply now, right? Because in some ways, as much things change, they stay the same, right? And I'll just share one quick story. I had interviewed my mother, I was with her in the car driving, and she just started telling the story. And so I was like, wait, stop, hold the phone. I pulled out my phone and I started recording it. And so she started telling me the story of this young Black boy named Clifford Glover, who was killed by the New York City police in Queens. He was walking to work with his father. They said he was a man. He was 8 years old. And I asked her, and this was like in 1973. And so I asked her, well, what did y'all do? She's like, well, we rioted in the streets, right? She's like, and then she said we had an economic boycott because the local chamber of commerce in Jamaica, Queens, so basically supported the police because the police supported their businesses. And then she went on to describe how at the same period, she was a part of a huge protest in DC on African Liberation Day. And I went back to her audio, because this is right after George Floyd was killed. Right. And I was trying to process it. And one of the things, George Floyd was killed on African Liberation Day, like May 25th, African Liberation Day.
And it's never said. I mean, my God. I mean, Dave Chappelle said, I was born at this time. That's the closest we've gotten. Right. And so this idea, and I was just thinking about it, right, in terms of how things change, how they're saying, right? He was killed and people are rioting, right? I'm not rioting. People are resisting. There's uprising. Like there's all this kind of movement that's happening. And so I was thinking about sort of like what her experience was in relation to what we're dealing with now, and what's the same and what's changed, and how can we build on that to sort of move things even further, So those are the kinds of things that I've been thinking about. Also, one other thing that I found in the archive was a letter that she had written to a friend that she never sent. And in the letter, she was in college, and in the letter, Dick Gregory visited her campus, and she describes his visit. And I should just say, Dick Gregory was hilarious in the third person 40 years after the fact. When I was reading her description, I was dying. But I wanted to find, I was like, oh, well, let me look for like a newspaper clipping or something, right, that talks about his visit. I wasn't able to find a newspaper clipping. Oh, I did eventually, but the first thing I found actually was Dick Gregory's FBI file. And Dick Gregory's FBI file also has a record of his visit. And so juxtaposed. So now teach us about how one does this wonderful research. So it's like, we'll just like, you just get in the archive. And I should say, I'm an anthropologist by training. My work was in the 21st century. So
a lot of this is new for me in terms of how to sort of do this. But, basically it's about, I think, sort of following where and in some ways it's similar, following where the stories lead you. So it was like when I found his so like, for example, just in this part with Dick Gregory, so I saw the FBI file. I saw what the FBI said about the visit. I saw what my mother said about the visit. I saw the differences, right, in that. And then I looked and I was like, well, what did other people say about the visit, right? And so, I'm looking with the student newspapers. And so just trying to sort of find connections. And for me, one of the reasons why I even think about the difference between my mother's account and the FBI's account is because I'm also interested in who has authority, like whose voices are, whose story, whose history is the right history, right?
I'm listening to you, having met your mom, and I didn't know that we had these points of connection. I went to Dick Gregory High School in St. Louis.
Oh, wow.
We were both Panthers. We didn't see a disconnect between being Panthers and Muslims at all.
Right.
Until some other things landed. And I just remember meeting her in this beautiful smile, which you have inherited.
Thank you.
And now I know why.
Right. Yeah.
I think what you're teaching us that is so wonderful, especially the younger people online, is how one goes about doing research, where one has to go, whether it's your mom or someone else. Your mom is even harder because then you remember all the conversations you didn't have.
Yes.
And now that you're full blown associate professor, oh my God, and I missed this opportunity and I missed that opportunity and I got to dig and I hope they didn't throw that away. Who has it? But it's FBI files, it's photographs, it's people's memories, it's comparing documents and deciding what's authoritative.
Yeah. It definitely.
Exciting.
No, it's quite exciting. It's a little overwhelming too, just because they're so. Because
they're tribute in the best way.
Yes, I think so, and I think it's about like in the connections and the people. And in that same letter that I found of her, she also talked about Kathleen Cleaver's visit to her campus. And I had the opportunity to meet Kathleen Cleaver at a conference. And it's just weird how so now my mother is a part of Kathleen Cleaver's archive and Kathleen Cleaver is part of her archive, right? And the ways in which we're also connected, I think that really shines out as well. Yeah.
It's amazing how those of us who are older, and you're probably one of the few young people who are writing about any of us. You know what I mean? When I got to Temple, I remember hanging out with Sonia Sanchez and with both of them. Do you remember when we used to hang out with Amiri Baraka and we're laughing and we're jumping on this dude who thinks he's going to run an African American studies program without us? It was all of these wonderful things, and nobody writes about us.
Right. Well, I think, but who else does some of this? I think is important. It's Sylvia Chan Malik's work.
I know. I talked to her Sunday.
Yeah.
I think that maybe I'll encourage you to add on an additional project when you finish this project. But I think in the way you're going about it, and for the young people listening, Dr. Swat is accessible. She doesn't put up with a lot of crap, but she is accessible if you have a bona fide proposal. She does want to hear you.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear about your grief and who you should have married and didn't marry. None of that stuff. But we've got to learn to write. And I think Sapelo and Muslim art have shown us where we can. Weren't you and Muslim art going to have this conference?
No, so I think, so if you, are you talking about Black Muslim Psychology Conference? Is that the conference?
I don't know what it was, John.
That's actually neither Muslim Arc or Sapelo. It's another great Black Muslim run organization, Muslim Wellness Foundation. And so Muslim Wellness Foundation has had a conference for the past 5 or 6 years called the Black Muslim Psychology Conference, which has been this really powerful space where Black Muslims are kind of coming together to kind of really dig deep, right, into sort of the questions of mental health, the questions of relationships and family, the questions of future and envisioning. So that's been a really great space that I
Well,
have
I just
participated in.
learned about that space. For some reason, I'm disconnected, unconnected. Maybe I was too busy retiring, but whatever it
Probably,
was, whatever it
probably.
was, I was so excited when I first heard. And there's a Muslim mental health conference coming. If you would send me some of those names,
I
I
will.
would make sure they're included.
Yes, I will
Because it
definitely.
was the same thing that happened with the spiritual abuse conference.
Yeah.
African Americans weren't invited, and we've had some conversations. It's not that the spiritual abuse only happens in immigrant communities;
Hmm.
it happens everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Unfortunately.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Last but not least, what do you want to tell us we should know, such as future collaborations? Where do you think we go next? Because if we don't hurry up and strategize, these people out here, they're strategizing. They are
Mm,
not going to let us do what we're doing. And
yeah.
no, history tells us they will kill us dead, burn our houses to the ground, etc., etc.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think, what do I want to say? So I end my book with this phrase. It's a combination of a phrase from Asada Shakur,
Hmm.
who's the activist in exile in Cuba, and a phrase from Kendrick Lamar, who is a young award-winning, Pulitzer Prize-winning, actually, right, hip hop
Would
artist.
you believe I got him on my music stuff?
Very good, very good. And the phrase that I end the book with is, "We have nothing to lose but our chains. We're gonna be all right." And I think what I would leave people with is that, you know, what we're experiencing now, as you mentioned, is not new in the sense that it has happened before.
Mhm.
It's new in the sense that we are all living through it in this moment. And I think that ultimately, because, and I think Bob Marley says, right, because we are on the right side, right, we will win. We're
Yeah.
going to be all right. But in the meantime, right, I think that what we have to do is to sort of free ourselves from the kinds of things that prevent us from working together,
Yeah.
prevent us from providing for each other, for caring for each other. That I was talking last night. I think it was Donna Austin who said this. The problem sometimes is that freedom for people isn't. Some people's freedom is like, oh, now I'm the one in power. That's what freedom means, as opposed to like,
That's
you
so
know,
true.
like, as opposed to like, yeah, she said a word last night, right? As opposed to freedom being really about all of us being free, right? And so I think the ways in which we don't support each other because whether it's because of race, whether it's because of gender, whether because of class, sexuality, religion, like all these ways in which, we find ways to see our distinctions as barriers as opposed to possibilities for connection. So I think we just so as long as I think so I guess I'm all I say to say is that the way that we win, and I often say this too, I think liberation is a journey, not a destination.
Right.
And so and how we try to live out what we want that freedom to look like now, right? We're not waiting for it to come.
I swear, I hate that. But it's like I gotta drop dead and get covered up, and then you're gonna tell me something.
Right.
Um,
So I think we have to do it now, and so we have to just again support each other. We're all we need, really, and we'll win, and we're gonna be ourselves. So we nothing to lose but our chains. We're gonna be all right.
well, you know that over the years, I inject myself into your life. You inject yourself into my life, and you may be on sabbatical, but I know where you live and I got your phone number. So therefore, I'm thinking of some projects with some women about this can we figure out how to be together?
Mm,
One of them is another host on this Muslim Network TV, and she's
mm,
a doll. You know,
mm,
she wants to know. This is
mhm.
not superficial. Her name is Hina
Mm,
Jabiri. And
okay.
but to bring her with Sylvia and Donna and some others in webinars where others can hear the talk because many are not clear on um, the terminology.
Mm,
They're locked up so long that if you challenge anything, they, God is busy, so let me play God and it's
right.
around.
Right. Right.
I will determine what's normative and what's halal. And I said,
Hmm.
well, gee, why do we need God if we got you?
Right.
That's a different conversation. But I would like to thank you from all of us.
Thank
I
you.
know you're a busy lady, and it is such an honor to get to play interrogator. And
No.
you will definitely get some of those going, figure out a time,
Hmm.
get back to you. If you don't answer my text, I will be very upset, and I will push you off my ass.
Yeah, I know
And
you
don't
will. So,
give it social media. All my criticism, no.
right. Right.
And give your husband my salams, and thank you again so much from Critical Talk, and we
Thank
will
you.
talk again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Welcome, Aslam.
Stay.